trying to sort of get a little bit more interactions going on, both between the audience and among the speaker. Usually we have sort of somebody presenting and somebody talking for quite a long time. So the idea today, we try to sort of break down the conversation into so you want to think of it, it's like the idea being a discussion, something like what you would call a water cooler discussion. Smaller things, so like you all are just like listening to us discussing the issue as colleagues, yes, talking about what are the big policy issues of the day. And of course, for our first sport event, we're going to talk about RCEP. Just a few weeks ago, the 15 countries signed RCEP. So there's a lot of exciting headlines. So maybe we can start. Most of the headline says, you know, this is the biggest free trade agreement ever. So I'll ask both our guests today, Kerm and Jayan. Is big all there is to RCEP, or is there something more that we can be excited about?
Shall I start, Bernard?
Please go ahead.
Okay. All right. So thank you for having me for this new sport event, which I think is a great idea. And this is my first ADB event, actually, since I left, which is exactly 10 months ago today. Although it feels like 10 years ago, the way things have gone this year. But, right. So with RCEP, I think, you know, size does matter. I think that's an important part of it. It brings together, you know, all of these countries, most of whom form the regional supply chain. So that is where size becomes an important issue. It covers the relevant countries involved in the cross-border shifting and moving of parts and components involved in the regional supply chain. But of course, it's more than just size. I guess a number of countries, especially the CJK, if you like, China, Japan, Korea, don't have free trade agreements amongst themselves, amongst the three. In fact, Japan doesn't have one with China or Korea. So this is one way in which to overcome that. They weren't able to conclude that trilateral agreement. So this is this overcomes that to some extent. And I guess, you know, finally, this comes at a time when the world was craving for some, not just good news, we had some good news with the vaccine, but also when multilateral institutions were being challenged and when, you know, protectionism started rearing its ugly head around the world. So this is another reason, the timing is also an issue, why it's an important outcome. So let me stop there.
Thanks a lot, Jay. Kerm, anything more to add from the perspective of sort of one of the country, not one of the ASEAN country, let's put it that way.
Thanks, Bernard, and hi, Jay. Long time no see. I put on my camera too, and then so we can see each other. So yeah, Jay, I actually already mentioned, and in addition to the size, I think one of the very important achievement of the RCEP is it's been signed during the time of the multilateralism actually is on the decline, and the signing of the RCEP is actually a good or a positive signal to that. The second point is on the for ASEAN actually also is a good. I mean, RCEP is the agreement where a group of developing countries member are on the driving seat, and that's different from other agreements. You know, we're looking at like CPTPP. You know, Japan certainly is the one behind the screen and then driving the process. But for RCEP, ASEAN countries have been on the driving seat since the beginning. So of course, other issues related to the quality of the agreement, and also, if we compare with other agreements. But anyway, it's a good signal that a group of countries can, developing countries can be together, and also not just forcing a very significant free trade agreement, but also reviving the multilateralism, even without or with limited role of major economies. So I think for that's about. And the third point for Vietnam, also similar to what Jay said. Vietnam has a bilateral trade agreements with almost all of the major countries or major trading partners, with bilateral agreement with Korea, with Japan, with US, with EU, except China. And for this RCEP, is going to bridge Vietnam bilateral economic with the PRC. So in that sense, it's also another significant achievement of the RCEP for Vietnam. I stop here too.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll just follow up, Geng, with you on the last part, right? So you say that, the RCEP brings in an additional market for Vietnam. So from the perspective of companies on the ground, on the firms, right? Let's say firms in ASEAN countries, just to make it a bit more concrete. What is the difference now with RCEP than before, when, as you said, there are already many free trade agreements? What additional thing does RCEP bring for these companies?
The market access is common among all of the agreements that Vietnam side signatory to it, and the difference is on the schedule of, for example, tariff reduction. They have different time frame, and also different products. So if for a firm or for an enterprise, if they look at, if they want to really maximize the benefits in the RCEP or in other agreements, first thing they have to do is to look at the tariff reduction schedule first, and also the products, the list of products that are in the tariff reduction, because not every product is going to have the same like a tariff reduction schedule. So that I haven't compared the tariff reduction schedule between the RCEP and other agreements yet, but it's going to be, because RCEP agreements basically based on ASEAN agreements, and also the existing bilateral trades among ASEAN and other countries. So it might have more gradual phasing out tariffs as compared with CPTPP or EVFTA. The second point is on the areas. RCEP doesn't include requirements on labor, on environment as stringent as other agreements like EVFTA or CPTPP. They really have strong requirements for labor, for enforcement, and also conditions on labor, environments, trading for the trade unions. So all of these are strong conditions, but not in RCEP. So that's the second difference that firms might need to realize, to be aware of that.
Okay, Jay, what's your advice? If I'm a small businessman or a small factory owner in the ASEAN, what should I do today, or at least what should I start doing to take advantage of RCEP?
Right. Well, I guess as Kwon was saying just now, there's so many tariff schedules and tariff rates because there's these overlapping FTAs, multiple overlapping FTAs, which is, widely known as the noodle bowl effect in this region. And so RCEP is hoping to try and remove all of that complexity to some extent. It won't do that immediately, because it adds another layer on top of the existing agreements. All the +1 agreements will remain for now. But if RCEP goes far enough in its implementation, other agreements will become redundant, or they'll naturally dissolve into the background, and then firms won't have to sit down and look through the tariff schedules of 7 or 8 different agreements to find out which one they should use, how they should use it, and so on. So it's that simplification that will be of great benefit, especially to small and medium-sized firms. But this will take time, and hopefully it will happen soon. And related to that is this idea that you might try and consolidate rules of origin, and that's a big thing for RCEP, to try and bring in a common rule so that you don't have different calculations and permutations for each market. And of course, meeting content requirement will be easier now because there's 15 countries from which you can source inputs. The minimum content is 40%. So for a firm, it should be easier to try and comply with the requirement because it's one rule of origin, and also easier because there's more options, so they don't have to divert trade as much to meet the minimum 40%.
That's good. Sounds good. I mean, as a small businessman, I should be very happy and I should be optimistic. Now, the other thing that we know that this year, we have seen a big shift towards sort of, let's say, digital commerce, right? So there seems to be a bit more reliance on digital goods and so on. Is RCEP forward-looking in the sense that it does include all these sort of new goods or new trade that will be coming ahead, or it's only focused on the traditional trading goods? Maybe Jay can answer that first.
Okay. Well, RCEP actually has got a chapter on e-commerce, chapter 12, and it's not too bad. Of course, everyone makes a comparison with the CPTPP, and this is a false comparison, I think. I mean, they are very different agreements with different levels of ambition. But it does have, it covers e-commerce, it covers services quite well. It deals with a lot of the services-related trade aspects, the customs simplification, paperless trade, all those sorts of issues, which are, very familiar to all ADB people because we support these activities in our work. But so all of those things are there. I mean, the question is on trade and data. And this is where, of course, it doesn't match up to CPTPP. So data flows, I think, it's fair to say that countries still have retained the, right to impose whatever restriction they want to, as long as they don't discriminate, between at the border or behind the border, between national and foreign, or between different foreign supplying countries. So that's this data flows will have to wait, and we'll have to look to other forms, other institutions. But everything else, which is important, is there, and again, there's room for improvement, especially if you compare it to CPTPP. But let's not forget that this is a very diverse agreement, so what they've achieved is pretty good, actually.
Thank you. Kung, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think Jay already covered it, and most of the points, especially on how the RCEP can facilitate the digital transformation. But what I want also to highlight here is for the digital transformation it's going about e-commerce, it's going about to be e-commerce, and then also on the telecommunication services, and also regarding on the mutual acceptance of professions among the member countries. So all of these are important for the digital transformation. On the other hand, the foundation for the digital transformation is actually about the regulatory reforms. And in that sense, RCEP might be a little bit like weaker than other agreements. I'm not comparing, like Jay said, it's difficult to compare across agreements, RCEP or CPTPP or EVFTA. However, at least in the sense that the other two agreements like EVFTA or CPTPP, they do have like certain requirements that can leverage and also promote like regulatory reforms and improving the business environment, which is important for digital transformation. So in a sense, RCEP is also the agreement also enable. Sorry, I think there's some. So in a sense, RCEP is promoting it through e-commerce, through telecommunication services, through also like a mutual acceptance of professions among the countries. However, in terms of like really indirectly, through the regulatory reform might be less powerful than other agreements. I stop here.
Thank you. I can see that the audience are already very excited to put in their questions. This, of course, will help me greatly, so I don't have to come up with any more new questions to ask our guests. Okay, but in the meantime, the rest of you audience, please fill up well, it's not a survey actually, it's more like a poll. Sorry, I just call it a survey. But please fill out the poll. It's on the chat box, so everyone please fill in. So far, we see only 5 people have filled in. So the price of participation is that you all should fill in the poll so that we can see what, so we can gauge, what does the RCI brain trust of ADB thinks about all these questions here, so that we can all share with each other our knowledge. So please do that. Just click, just 4 simple questions to fill in. In the meantime, we have a question from Ramesh to our Jay and Kem. So his first question is, with respect to trade in goods, how will national treatment apply to local content? Many countries want to promote their own industry, but once RCEP comes, will such local content requirements go away? So that's sort of something I think Jay was talking earlier about the rules of origin. Maybe you want to elaborate a bit more on that, Jay.
Right. Thanks, Bernard, and good to hear from Ramesh, although I can't see him. But yeah, I think the difference now, of course, with RCEP is that, oh, I can see you there now, Ramesh, yes. Good to see you. The difference is, now what is considered local is now anything produced within the grouping of countries. So, you can't now distinguish between home content, if you like, or some other member countries' content in meeting the minimum 40% requirement for preferences. So that will, that could support your own industries in your country or encourage, greater linkages within the group as you go forward. Of course, the countries that get penalized are the non-members. They're the only ones that won't qualify for this. So the rules of accumulation now have been simplified and broadened because of the many countries involved in this agreement. And so that might take away some of your domestic content for the particular country concerned, but then, you might be able to make up for that with the when other countries also use these, minimum content rules to meet their requirements. So there'll be a bit of shift in sharing going forward, but generally I think, they should make it easier to satisfy the minimum content requirements. Yeah. I hope that answers your question, Ramesh. I'm not too sure if it does.
Thank you, thank you. Kem, please go ahead. I know you want to add something.
Yeah, no, for the local contents, yeah, I agree with what Jay said, and also just want to if we look at the the history of local contents, and if we ask the questions, does the local contents help to develop domestic industries? The answer almost is no. So far, after since the establishment of WTO 1995, when the local contents requirement has been put in WTO agreements and also in a number of agreements, very few countries can use local contents to develop domestic industries, and most of them fail. So the use of local contents actually is not really, I mean, it almost like a pretext for protectionism rather than really local, developing domestic industries. So I think we need to have a fresh look at the local content requirements and how RCEP dealing with that. And the way RCEP dealing with local contents, consider it as a regional, like a content value. I think might be more appropriate rather than looking at in the country context, local contents in the country context. RCEP expands it to the concept of the regional value contents. I think that is more appropriate. However, if we say how the regional value content can help domestic development of domestic industries, that need to be answered in future. But again, going back to the free trade agreement, the most important factor that can help developing the domestic industries or domestic economy is the unilateral liberalization of each of the country, and it's about how to use their commitments in any free trade agreements, for example, in this case RCEP, to leverage on domestic reforms, regulatory reforms, and that actually help much better to develop domestic industries rather than just relying on local contents.
Thank you very much, Kang. Do you want to say anything about the mysterious Chapter 6? Before you answer the Chapter 6 question, maybe you can tell people what Chapter 6 is. Kang? Yes. If you didn't see, Ramesh asked a question about how open is Chapter 6 with regard to mutual recognition. Or Jay, maybe you can take up that question first.
Chapter 6. Now, what is Chapter 6 again?
Okay, Ramesh, you're now back on the spot. What is Chapter 6?
I think that's the one on, if I remember, that's the one on standards and things like technical regulations and so on. So because that's been a pretty hot topic, right, for debate on how standards and codes will be recognized between countries.
Right, sure. Okay, so absolutely. I think this mutual recognition aspect of all of this is going to be critical. But yeah, there's so much diversity again in this agreement that there are built-in sort of caveats that allow countries to deal with this at their own pace and so on and so forth. It's not as explicit as the CPTPP, which had all these side letters that basically allowed sort of, separate deals almost to be, signed on the sidelines of the main agreement and kind of in a non-transparent way. It's not that bad, but I think there's enough flexibility here that's been built in. Of course, this is called, special and differential treatment, right? So, and this is this is pluses and minuses. It can encourage countries to exploit it when they don't need to. But if it's used, in a open and proper way, it can actually deal with the capacity constraints in different countries in meeting these requirements. Yeah, so mutual recognition, I think, is critical, and it's going to be, important in making sure that all countries here, pretty much follow a similar timetable in getting this agreement concluded. On standards, I think more so than other areas, this will be important. I think RCEP's problem will be how it enforces compliance. It's done away with the ISDS, the Investor State Dispute Resolution Mechanism, because New Zealand has a law that says it won't sign up to any agreement with the ISDS in it. But it has a dispute settlement mechanism, and we have to see whether it has more teeth than the ASEAN mechanism, which is relatively toothless, if you like. At the end of the day, I think when countries see the benefits of these sorts of reforms, that's the best sort of safeguard in ensuring that these things, get complied with, and also, are done with reciprocity. Yeah. Let me stop there. Or maybe I'll just quickly say also, I think Kwong raised a very good point earlier about how, we should use these sorts of agreements to really look further than what's in the text itself. And the real benefits to come from agreements like RCEP is if it's multilateralized and it promotes, free and open trade. And, I have to agree with the local content assessment. I think there's very little evidence to support that these things have helped with even infant industries in many countries. We call it different things these days. We call it reshoring. We call it, all sorts of new names. There was rebalancing as well, but they're all the same thing. It's a different form of protectionism. And I think the best rule of origin is the missing rule of origin, when we no longer need them. And if we multilateralize all our preferences so that there's no longer a margin of preference to be exchanged in this way, that's when RCEP will realize its full potential of promoting free and open trade. And the jury's out on that, but if ASEAN can be a guide, then the prospects are good, because ASEAN's done it quite well. Let me stop there.
Thank you. Kong, anything to add to that?
Sorry, Bernard, I was disconnected and I just joined. So
maybe we'll just, to give you time to catch up, we'll just share the result of the poll. So we have some interesting questions that were, how should we say, compiled together with inputs from our, speakers today. Hannah, can we share the results of the poll so that we can see? Oh, we probably need to Zoom. Unfortunately, we are not all as young as you, Hannah. My eyesight is not that good. Can we zoom in about the result or not really? Very innovative use of PowerPoint. So the first question we have there is question number 1. Which country are most likely to benefit most from RCEP? Alfredo is very excited about that because I think he's trying to invest his money and he's trying to figure out which country he can invest in. So according to our wisdom of the crowd, it's actually China. So let's all put our money into China. And followed closely by CLMB. And the rich country are seen as not likely to benefit the most, not to benefit much. And actually the ASEAN or the middle income ASEAN country are also not likely to. So the poorest and China. So that seems to be the consensus. Interesting. So maybe Alfredo will want to say something about that. Or maybe we'll ask Jay and Kern later as well. Now the question number 2. How long will it take for the majority of ASEAN and non-ASEAN countries to ratify RCEP for it to come into force? I think it's something that our speaker haven't touched upon yet, but there's a time yet to it takes time for the country to ratify RCEP. So most are quite optimistic and say that it will take 2 years. I wonder if our speaker will agree with that. 2 years to ratify RCEP. 9 out of I think the 70 who responded. Only a few think it will take more than 3 years. Question number 3. How will signing of RCEP affect multilateral institutions like WTO? So most people say, meh, neutral, right? Meh, doesn't really. So a few things that it could strengthen. Actually, meh and unclear. Most people think it doesn't really matter that much. A few, only 2 out will think that it will weaken. And finally, in what area sector is RCEP likely to have its greatest impact, benefit? So most people seem to agree with you, Jay. Consolidating rules of origin. So,
that's why I suggested this question.
So it seems that you have still a lot of supporters in ADB. Yeah. So consolidating rule of origin seems to be seen to be the main benefit, and followed closely by tariff reduction, whereas regulatory convergence and new or WTO plus reform have not seen much success. So thank you all for sharing this, your thoughts. Maybe we can ask Jay and Kerl to also give their views on those questions, whether you agree, disagree totally, or So the idea is that we let the people say before, so let you share, have your say or your view, right? So yeah. Maybe Jay, you can start first.
Right. Okay. So I think in terms of the first question on who will benefit the most, yeah, that was the first question. I think my view is that it'll depend on how countries decide to use this agreement, how much it's in their hands, how much they can benefit. But having said that, I think the countries that have to undergo the greatest amount of change are potentially also the greatest beneficiaries, right? And this is where I think I agree with poorest countries, especially the CLMV, if you like, perhaps less V these days, but these are still countries in transition from quite centralized to market economies. So they will have the big bang effects if they do decide to embrace RCEP. China, everyone seems to think that they'll be the biggest benefit. Some people think they're the biggest beneficiary. I think China has already benefited a lot, and there's not much more really for it in terms of changes, right? Levels, yes, we've got there. So I don't know if China will have that much more to benefit, but the most, the countries with the biggest barriers to dismantle can benefit the most. And in terms of the other questions, I've just forgotten now what the second question was. Can you remind me, Bernard, what the other second question was? Bernard, are you there?
Second question is how long it will take to ratify RCEP.
You had to check as well, didn't you? Okay, right. Yeah, I think, everyone is hoping that it will happen on 1st January 2022, right? That's the hope. Some people are pushing that, I guess, the 1 year. It's also the earliest and also perhaps, the most likely at this stage, but that could easily slip. I mean, RCEP itself, signing, missed its deadline so many times. So 1 or 2 years, I think I would tend to agree with that. Yeah. So let me stop talking and let's hear from Kwang. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Jay. I think for the time frame, I think 1 or 2 years would be the desired time frame, and also maybe practical. If we look at the CPTPP, actually it was ratified within a year. So I think hopefully, but of course it depends on the quality of the agreement as well, because if that they might be rushing to the signing, so there are issues that might create hiccups, back home. So, but I think 1 or 2 years that could be a practical time frame. On the question of who's going to benefit most, and I also tend to agree that China, but of course, China, like you said, Jay, China has benefited already from trade, even without the RCEP, China has benefited. So RCEP is not going to add much benefit to China. Now, looking at other countries, if we look at not just the RCEP is not just about the trade, it's about investment as well, because most of the free trade agreements, in addition to market access, they also bring a lot of opportunities for foreign direct investment. So if looking from the investment side, smaller countries might also get substantial benefits, and especially China now, the PRC now is becoming like increasingly becoming important foreign direct investment. In Vietnam, for example, now the PRC actually already overtaken the Korea, and if we add Taiwan PRC, Hong Kong PRC, actually they become like only after Singapore. So I think if we look at it from investment perspectives, smaller countries might also benefit. Of course, the question is how that can support the development of domestic industries. That is a separate question, but at least benefiting from investment in addition to the market access is also quite important.
Yes. Do we
Yeah,
want to end up with the last two questions?
Yes, that's right. But just on the last point that Kwong made, I think
Sure.
that's a very good point, actually. Yeah, I mean, all the model simulations about these sorts of agreements point to this investment effect, more so than any other effect. In fact, so much so that people question the ability of these countries to absorb that much investment. This is why you have Vietnam clearly the biggest beneficiary from TPP, the original version, and so on and so forth. But I think that's a very good point about keeping in mind that a lot of trade agreements are more to do about non-trade issues, especially investment, rather than just pure trade issues. Yeah, so the other questions, I just noticed that I can actually pull it up myself now. So how will it affect multilateral institutions like WTO? I have to agree with the sentiment of Mayor, as you put it so eloquently, Bernard. But this is, of course, sad in a way. We need, to try and get institutions like the WTO revived. And in the past, actually, in the good old days, so to speak, this is pre the attack on multilateralism or multilateral institutions, concluding an agreement like this would be seen as diminishing the role of the WTO. But we are in a different world now, where things are, these institutions are so much undermined, especially by the previous U.S. administration, that any development of this sort is seen as a possible boost to multilateralism. So that, I think, is quite telling how far we have come, when in the past RCEP would be a challenge to multilateralism. Now it may not boost multilateralism, but it's certainly not going to undermine it. That's where we are today. And finally, I guess, yeah, here I think this consolidating of rules of origin is probably going to be its biggest benefit, although potentially the regulatory convergence, I think, has a big role to play, especially for the supply chains in the region, if they can press this type of reforms going forward. And I think it will depend on how countries use this agreement to press for reforms at home. That's where things can work quite well. So RCEP is a relatively shallow agreement, so we can't expect too much in the new areas. But rules of origin and hopefully regular convergence. I'd agree with that. Thank you.
Great. Kong, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with Jay, and also if we're looking at the global trading system, might be the WTO has become increasingly like a political body looking more at the global trade disputes. They're not really in the market access. So the RCEP countries, the big gap between countries in RCEP also indicates if any trade dispute happen, might be the WTO can still be the place where they can resort to, and so in a sense, in a sense. It's going to be, the trading system is going to be more like a specialized, and where the regional FTA is going to be there, and
Okay, thank you, Kong. So I'm sorry that we slightly overran our time. So are there any further questions from the audience for our two guests today? But in the meantime, I would like to invite Ashish to say something about his. Of course, everyone knows that RCEP is missing India. Well, India, went all the way and pulled out, 2 meters from the finish line or something. So Ashish, can you tell us something? Because you say it's not very likely that India will join.
Okay, you caught me very unexpectedly
That's the whole
there.
point, to make sure. No.
But I was listening. I think it's from all the readout that I'm getting from India. I think it's unlikely that India will be able to join RCEP. Initially, when the RCEP agreement, or a year back, when India decided to stay out, there was still a hope that through some bargaining and some side deals, maybe India would still come in. I think that's very unlikely now. And part of the process is, part of the reason is that India feels that this is likely to be a backdoor free trade agreement with China. And that is going to leave its manufacturing sector open. And manufacturing is India's weak spot. They're not competitive, or they feel that they're not competitive. They will not be able to survive. At the same time, they need manufacturing to create the jobs which they don't have enough of. I think the other thing which India also feels is that the main comparative advantage that India has with the RCEP countries is its service sector. And it felt that it wasn't getting enough on the services side from all of these countries to be able to take the risk and jump in and open its manufacturing sector. I think that this thinking has now sunk in very deep. It's become accepted wisdom. And I suspect that it will be very, very difficult. I don't see much room for maneuver by the Indian government in this situation. So I suspect India will stay out of RCEP for the time being. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Ashish, for surprising you with this question. Yeah. But I think you handled it very well, and thank you for enlightening us about what's the latest thinking there. Any other question from the audience? Maybe you can just type in the chat box. Some other. So in the meantime, let me ask sort of closing kind of question to our guests today. So is RCEP the end game? Will there be any future? Do you think there'll be any more future trade agreement, or this is it? Sorry, Kang, maybe you want to start first?
Yeah, well, but that is difficult to say because trade agreement is it depends on so many factors, geopolitical issues, on all of the uncertainties going on now, and then also on the I mean, even the impact of the COVID-19. So it's difficult to say if it's that whether it's an end game or not. But at least up to now, there's no like similar like mega agreements in the horizon yet. But no one know, after like the new administration in the US, and if the US going to join they're going to join the CPTPP, and they might reconsider their position in Asian Pacific, and then so that might also be a factor that can add into the I mean overall picture of the regional trade agreement. But at least at the moment, the RCEP is like this by size, free trade agreement by size.
Thank you. Jay, anything to add?
Yeah, so I think Kwang's right that this is hardly going to be the end. I mean, there's a lot of appetite to continue with free trade agreements and free trade disagreements, which have been proliferating as well. Rather than the US joining CPTPP, now we know that President Xi has said that China would like to join. So I think that has given the CPTPP an interesting twist. When it was first, mooted by the Obama administration to improve the US role or position in this region, it could end up actually strengthening China's role in this region. So that would see a complete turnaround, going back to its original, if you like, motivations in the TPP version. Yeah, if the other countries will have China on board, Japan in particular, I guess, then this, of course, changes things dramatically. And of course, we also have, the FTAP, which is the APEC-wide agreement, which China is very keen on pushing. And this is the only agreement short of the WTO that brings the US and China together in this region. So maybe we'll see a revival of that agreement going forward. Of course, President-elect Biden was very much part of the Obama administration that pushed the TPP, but a lot has happened since then, so it's not clear that too much has happened for him to then say, okay, we are now ready to join an agreement that's already been negotiated and not yet in effect, but has gone a long way. Coming to it late when you were once the leader might be difficult for the US. But a new agreement like this FTAP, which hasn't started yet, could be wouldn't have all that baggage, and they could come in to the region through FTAP, and they could engage China as well directly through FTAP, and that would be the world's biggest agreement at that point. But FTAP is still very, very early days, but it's there. It's on the table. It's what they decide to do with it. But hopefully, again, to finish off, I think if all of these things become too complicated, maybe the resort will be back to the WTO that's been around the longest, has served us so well, has gone through a difficult time during the Trump administration, but now we're starting a new era, so hopefully the WTO will see a strong revival. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a new question from Dorothea. So I guess I don't see any other questions. So we'll use that as a final question. So I'll just rephrase it as, what's your parting advice to other regions, right, on how they should go about negotiating and signing such a comprehensive FTA? So this is basically now, especially directed to Jay, since he's now no longer ADB staff, he's looking for juicy consulting contract. So how are you going to emphasize your services, the lessons of experiences of the region, on how to go about signing such a comprehensive FTA?
I mentioned at the start that today is exactly 10 months since I left ADB. So in exactly 2 months, mark your calendar. My services will be available at very reasonable rates for anyone who needs them. No, but seriously, I think what lessons in negotiations? Well, I think what we can learn from RCEP, firstly, is that it's not easy, right? I mean, remember, it started in 2012. They had, I think, 29 formal rounds of negotiation, formal, and then they had tons of intersessionals and other informal meetings, and so on and so forth. So this is a long and winding road for any group of countries, and a very expensive one too, unless you can do it on the sidelines of an existing sort of framework, right? So, but today maybe, yeah, with all of us doing Zoom, it could be a bit cheaper and easier, but it takes a long time. And also, I guess another lesson coming out of the negotiations is that when you have, all it takes is one member, really, to delay things considerably. And I think India was that member. As Ashish was saying, I think the concerns with China in particular are so great, and they didn't suddenly become an issue last year. They were always there. But I think, countries should spot very quickly, a member that might not be willing to jump on board and deal with it one way or the other early. That's another lesson. But I think finally the best lesson from all of this is Asia can come together and negotiate the biggest agreement without the superpowers being involved. Superpowers, I mean the old superpowers, the US or Europe, and Asia can do it on its own, and they've done it this time, and that's a very good thing. And they did it at the most difficult of times, when the whole region and the world is going through this terrible pandemic. So they're very good. That's a good sign in itself, and should be a positive signal to other countries looking to also engage in a similar type of barrier reducing arrangements or other free trade arrangements going forward. That's what I take away from this negotiation.
Thank you for that great words of wisdom. Kerm, what's your parting words of wisdom?
So Vijay, I just want to pick up the last point you guys said. So the Asian countries actually are able to forge an impressive agreement, and they are able to really take the lead and drive the trade liberalization in the region. And one of the main reasons is that there's a convergence of not just interest, but also convergence of policy, trade liberalization policy over the past decades. And most of the countries, actually all of the countries in the RCEP are the one that been following and been pursuing the trade liberalization efforts, consistently throughout, 4 decades, almost like 3 to 4 decades. So I think, and that is the fundamental foundation for the countries to come together and then agreeing on a very on a mega agreement as RCEP. So I think if the lesson learned from here is only when there's a convergence of interest, convergence of policies, then the countries can sit down together, regardless of whether they are big or major economies or small economies. As soon as they have the similar interests, similar policies, the result of the RCEP is just a matter of time, but it's not a matter of principle.
Thank you very much. I see no other question. I have failed miserably in my role of keeping time. We are like 1 hour, but I think I have succeeded in creating a lively discussion and interaction among everyone. And thank you all for staying on until the end. And can we give a big virtual applause to our two speakers today? I don't know what's the equivalent of a virtual applause nowadays. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you, Bernard. Thanks, Jay, and thanks everyone.
Yes, thanks to everyone, and good to see all of you again. And well done, Bernard, on starting this off so well.
No, thank you. The idea is just, as we all, struggle during this COVID working from home isolation, right? The idea is that let's bring together everyone. Let's, talk, listen to each other. So that's why no presentation, only conversation, right? That's the tagline.
I think that's been the most successful part of this. Yes.
Thank you everyone for joining, and look forward to your future participation. We are still thinking what the next topic will be for our SERD policy talk. And so thank you all for joining, and I hope you all enjoy the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.